The discovery. The vastness of space had always belonged to the Zorathi Empire. For 3,000 years, their massive fleets had carved through star systems like knives through silk, claiming worlds and bending entire civilizations to their will. Their ships were legends among the stars, dark metal giants that blocked out suns and carried enough firepower to crack planets in half. No species had ever successfully resisted them, and certainly none had ever made them question their own superiority. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the swirling blue and green marble that the primitive inhabitants called Earth. His 4 arms were crossed behind his back, his scaled face displaying the same expression of bored confidence that had served him well through dozens of conquests. The humans were supposed to be nothing special, just another young species that had barely figured out how to leave their own atmosphere. According to the Empire's records, they were emotional, chaotic, and technologically backward. This would be simple work. "Admiral," came the voice of Scout Commander Vex'lon, his tone carrying an unusual edge of uncertainty. "The reconnaissance teams have returned from the outer system." Kethvar turned slowly, his golden eyes narrowing. Vex'lon was young for a scout commander, but he had earned his position through careful observation and accurate reporting. The fact that he seemed nervous was interesting. "Report, Commander." Vex'lon activated the holographic display at the center of the bridge. The image that appeared caused several officers to step closer. Instead of the expected collection of primitive satellites and crude mining stations, the display showed something entirely different. Ships, human ships, dozens of them, arranged in precise formations at key points throughout the solar system. "Sir, we detected 47 vessels of unknown configuration positioned at strategic points around their star system. They appear to be waiting." Admiral Kethvar studied the hologram with growing interest. The human ships were unlike anything in the Empire's databases. They were sleek where Zorathi vessels were angular, curved where Empire designs were harsh. Some were long and needle-like, others broad and disc-shaped. All of them were clearly built for war. "Waiting for what, Commander?" "For us, sir. Our stealth systems are the best in the galaxy. No primitive species should have been able to detect our approach, yet these ships moved into position within hours of our arrival in this system. They knew we were coming." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's engines. Kethvar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest. Surprise. Not fear, certainly not yet, but genuine surprise. He walked closer to the hologram, studying the human fleet formations with the eye of a veteran warrior. "What do we know about their capabilities?" Vex'lon hesitated. "Sir, we attempted passive scans, but their hulls seemed to absorb or deflect most of our sensor arrays. What we did detect suggests energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. They're using technology we don't recognize." "Unknown technology doesn't mean superior technology, Commander. Perhaps they've simply developed along different lines than expected." But even as Kethvar spoke the words, he found himself studying the precise formation of the human ships. There was something about their positioning that spoke of tactical brilliance. Each vessel was placed to provide overlapping fields of fire while maintaining multiple escape routes. It was the work of someone who understood space warfare at a fundamental level. Light years away, in the depths of space between star systems, the Zorathi High Council was receiving the same reports. The council chamber was a massive sphere of polished metal floating in the void, connected to the Empire's communication networks by quantum relays. High Counselor Zarthek, the Empire's chief military strategist, examined the holographic displays with growing irritation. "This is impossible," he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Our intelligence reports indicate that the humans have barely achieved interplanetary travel. They should have nothing more than chemical rockets and primitive orbital stations." Counselor Merdak, an older Zorathi with scars across his armored hide, leaned forward. "Perhaps our intelligence is outdated. It has been nearly 2 centuries since we last paid attention to this system." 2 centuries is nothing for a species that primitive, Zarthek snapped. They should barely have advanced beyond their original capabilities. Yet now we're supposed to believe they've developed a fleet that can detect our best stealth technology. The debate continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. The Zorathi Empire had never been defeated, never been seriously challenged, and certainly never been caught off guard by a species they considered beneath notice. The human fleet, whatever its capabilities, was clearly an attempt at intimidation. The Empire would respond as it always did, with overwhelming force. Meanwhile, on Earth, Defense Coordinator Sarah Chen sat in the command center buried 3 kilometers beneath the Rocky Mountains. The facility was a marvel of human engineering, carved from solid rock and lined with quantum processors that could coordinate the movements of thousands of ships across the solar system. Sarah was a small woman with graying hair and calm eyes, but those who worked with her knew that she possessed one of the sharpest tactical minds in human history. "They're taking the bait," reported Captain Marcus Rivera from the main display screen. Marcus commanded the human fleet from the bridge of the New Horizon, a ship that represented the culmination of centuries of human innovation. Unlike the massive, imposing vessels favored by most galactic civilizations, human ships were designed for efficiency, speed, and adaptability. "How long until their main fleet arrives?" Sarah asked. "Based on their current trajectory and our analysis of their propulsion systems, approximately 18 hours. Sarah nodded and turned to address the room full of officers and analysts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been preparing for this moment for over 200 years. Ever since our first contact with galactic civilization, we've known this day would come. The Empire believes we're primitive, helpless, and easy to conquer. Let's show them what human innovation can accomplish when we're properly motivated." The plan had been generations in the making. When humanity first detected the Zorathi Empire's expansion patterns, Earth's leaders realized that contact was inevitable. Rather than reveal their true capabilities immediately, they had chosen to appear weak and disorganized, while secretly preparing for war. Human colonies throughout the solar system had been disguised as mining operations. Advanced weapons systems had been built inside asteroids. Entire fleets had been constructed in hidden shipyards on the dark side of moons. The Zorathi weren't the first galactic power to underestimate humanity, and they wouldn't be the last. But they were about to become the first to truly understand what humans were capable of when their survival was at stake. Back aboard the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kethvar was making final preparations for what he expected to be a routine conquest. The Empire's fleet numbered over 300 vessels, each one capable of reducing a planet's surface to molten glass. They had faced down civilizations with thousands of years of spacefaring experience and emerged victorious every time. "Sir," Vexlon reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the image of a human male in a simple military uniform. Captain Marcus Rivera looked directly into the camera with the sort of calm confidence that comes from absolute certainty. "This is Captain Rivera of the Earth Defense Force. You have entered human space without authorization. We're prepared to discuss terms for your peaceful withdrawal." Several Zorathi officers laughed out loud. The audacity was almost amusing. A primitive species was attempting to negotiate with the Zorathi Empire from a position of strength. Admiral Kethvar stepped forward. "Human Captain, you are addressing Admiral Kethvar of the Zorathi Empire. Your system is now under our protection. Surrender your vessels immediately, and no harm will come to your population." Captain Rivera's expression didn't change. If anything, his slight smile became more pronounced. "Admiral, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. We're not surrendering today. We're not surrendering ever." The transmission ended, leaving the Zorathi bridge in stunned silence. No species had ever spoken to the Empire with such casual dismissal. It was either the bravery of warriors or the madness of fools. "Sir," the weapons officer reported, "all gun batteries are charged and ready. We can end this in minutes." Admiral Kethvar studied the tactical display. noting how the human ships maintained their formations without any sign of fear or panic. 47 vessels against 300. The mathematics were absurd, yet something about the humans' confidence was deeply unsettling. "Maintain attack formation," he ordered, "but do not fire until I give the command. I want to understand what they think they can accomplish." The Zorathi fleet began its approach to Earth, engines blazing like new stars against the darkness of space. On every ship, warriors prepared for battle, confident in their superiority and excited by the prospect of adding another conquest to the Empire's long history. They had no idea that they were flying into the most carefully prepared trap in human history, or that the species they considered primitive had spent 2 centuries planning for exactly this moment. The humans were waiting with the patience of hunters and the smile of those who knew something their enemies did not. The real battle was about to begin. The revelation. The Zorathi fleet moved through space like a steel avalanche, their massive ships casting shadows across the inner solar system as they approached Earth. Admiral Kethvar stood on his bridge, watching the tactical displays with growing confusion. The human ships had not retreated, had not scattered in panic, and had not attempted to flee to the safety of their planet's atmosphere. Instead, they held their positions with the calm precision of experienced warriors. "Distance to human fleet?" Kethvar asked. 50,000 kilometers in closing, Admiral, replied his navigation officer. "Their ships are maintaining formation, but not powering weapon systems." That was the detail that bothered Kethvar the most. Every species the Empire had encountered followed predictable patterns when faced with overwhelming force. They either surrendered immediately, fled in terror, or made desperate attacks with whatever weapons they possessed. The humans were doing none of these things. They were simply waiting. "Sir," Scout Commander Vexilon called out, his voice tight with alarm. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system, much larger than what we initially scanned." The main display updated, and suddenly the Zorathi bridge fell silent. The 47 human ships they had detected were not the entire fleet. They were just the visible portion. As the Empire's sensors penetrated deeper into the system, they revealed hundreds of additional contacts. Ships emerging from asteroid fields where they had been perfectly camouflaged. Vessels rising from the dark sides of moons where they had been hidden for decades. Entire battle groups that had been invisible until now, protected by technology that made Zorathi stealth systems look primitive by comparison. "How many?" Admiral Kethvar asked quietly. Vexilon's voice was barely audible. "Over 800 confirmed contacts, sir. And we're still detecting new signatures. 800 ships. The humans had built a fleet larger than most galactic civilizations possessed, and they had kept it completely hidden until this moment." Kethvar felt something cold growing in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but the first whisper of doubt that had touched him in decades of conquest. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet." Captain Marcus Rivera appeared on the screen again, and this time he was not alone. Behind him, the bridge of his ship bustled with calm, professional activity. Human officers moved with the confident efficiency of a crew that had trained together for years. Rivera himself looked even more relaxed than before, as if the appearance of the Zorathi fleet was exactly what he had been expecting. "Admiral Kethvar," Rivera said with that same slight smile, "I hope you've had time to review your tactical situation. As you can see, we've been preparing for your visit." On Earth, Sarah Chen watched the confrontation unfold from her command center. Every screen around her displayed different aspects of the battle that was about to begin: fleet positions, weapon readiness, communication intercepts from the Zorathi ships. Her staff worked with quiet intensity, but there was no panic, no desperate rushing around. They had rehearsed this scenario thousands of times. "The Zorathi are scanning our ships," reported Lieutenant Commander Park from the sensor station. "They're trying to analyze our technology." "Let them look," Sarah replied calmly. "They won't understand what they're seeing." She was right. Aboard the Zorathi flagship, The science officers were struggling to make sense of the readings they were getting from the human vessels. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases, where Zorathi ships used massive fusion reactors that produced enormous amounts of waste heat. The human vessels seemed to generate power through processes that left almost no thermal signature. Their weapon systems were completely alien, not the plasma cannons or particle beams favored by most galactic civilizations, but something that their sensors couldn't identify. "Admiral," the chief science officer reported, "we cannot determine the nature of their weapon systems. Our databases have no reference for the energy patterns we're detecting." Admiral Cathfar studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human fleet had arranged itself in a three-dimensional formation that surrounded the Zorathi ships on all sides. It was a classic encirclement tactic, executed with mathematical precision. More disturbing was the fact that every human ship was positioned exactly where it needed to be to provide overlapping fields of fire, while minimizing exposure to return fire. This was not the work of a primitive species. This was advanced military doctrine applied by masters of their craft. "Open a channel to the human captain," Cathfar ordered. Rivera's image appeared again, but this time the Admiral noticed details he had missed before. The human's uniform was simple but perfectly maintained. His hair was graying at the temples, suggesting experience and age. Most importantly, his eyes held the steady confidence of someone who had seen real combat and survived. "Captain Rivera," Cathfar said, "you have assembled an impressive fleet. However, you are still outnumbered. The Zorathi Empire has ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. We have never been defeated in battle. I offer you one final chance to surrender with honor." Rivera's smile widened slightly. "Admiral, I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid we'll have to decline. You see, there's something about humans that your intelligence reports probably didn't mention." "And what is that?" "We don't surrender. Ever. It's not really in our nature." The transmission ended, and Admiral Cathfar found himself staring at a blank screen. In 3 decades of military service, he had never encountered such casual defiance from a species facing impossible odds. Either the humans were suicidal, or they knew something he didn't. "Sir," the weapons officer reported, "all batteries are ready to fire. We can destroy their fleet in the opening salvo." Cathfar hesitated. Something was wrong here, something fundamental that he was missing. No species built a fleet this size just to commit suicide against superior forces. The humans had a plan, and until he understood what it was, attacking might be exactly what they wanted him to do. That's when the human fleet moved. It wasn't a retreat or an attack. It was something far more unsettling. Every human ship began to shift position simultaneously, their movements coordinated with precision that suggested either perfect communication systems or artificial intelligence beyond anything the Empire possessed. Within minutes, the human formation had transformed from a defensive arrangement into something that looked almost like an art form. Beautiful, complex, and somehow threatening in ways that the Zorathi couldn't define. "What are they doing?" Cathfar demanded. Before anyone could answer, space around the human fleet began to shimmer. At first, the Zorathi officers thought their sensors were malfunctioning. Then they realized they were witnessing something that should have been impossible. The human ships were bending light around themselves, not to become invisible, but to create patterns of brilliance that turned their entire fleet into a massive display. The display showed images, scenes from Earth's history projected across thousands of kilometers of space. Humans building their first cities, launching their first rockets, walking on their moon. The images shifted and changed, telling the story of a species that had climbed from primitive hunters to masters of technology in just a few thousand years. But the final image was the one that made Admiral Cathfar's blood run cold. It showed human ships, not the vessels currently surrounding his fleet, but older designs, simpler ones. They were fighting against creatures that looked disturbingly familiar. Creatures with 4 arms, scaled skin, and golden eyes. The image was clearly ancient, but the implications were terrifying. "Sir," Vexlon whispered, Those ships in the projection, they're fighting Zorathi vessels. That's impossible, Kethvar replied, but his voice lacked conviction. We've never encountered humans before. The projection changed again, showing star charts with dates and locations, system after system where the Empire had claimed victory over primitive species. Only now the charts showed something different. They showed human ships arriving after the battles, rescuing survivors, relocating refugees, and building hidden colonies where the Empire's victims could start new lives. Captain Rivera's voice filled the Zorathi bridge without an incoming transmission request. Somehow, the humans had taken control of their communication systems. Admiral Kethvar, meet the Human Refugee Protection Fleet. For the past 300 years, we've been following the Zorathi Empire's expansion, arriving just behind your conquests to help the survivors. We've relocated over 50 million refugees from destroyed worlds. We've established hidden colonies and systems you've never bothered to explore, and we've been waiting for the right moment to have this conversation. The tactical display updated again, and Kethvar felt his worst fears confirmed. The 800 human ships they had detected were not the entire fleet. They were just the local defense force. Throughout the galaxy, in systems the Empire considered secure, hundreds of additional human vessels were decloaking. Space stations that had been disguised as asteroids were coming online. Entire human colonies that had been hidden for generations were revealing themselves. "How many ships do you have?" Kethvar asked, his voice barely steady. "Enough," Rivera replied simply. "We've had 3 centuries to prepare, Admiral. 3 centuries to study your tactics, understand your technology, and build something better. We know how your shields work, how your weapons fire, and how your command structure operates. We know because we've been watching, learning, and preparing." On Earth, Sarah Chen allowed herself a small smile as she watched the Zorathi fleet's formation begin to waver. She could see the uncertainty spreading through their ranks as they realized the true scope of what they were facing. "Phase 2, she ordered quietly. Throughout human space, carefully prepared plans that had been decades in the making began to unfold. The Zorathi Empire was about to discover that humanity had not spent 3 centuries hiding in fear. They had spent that time becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that could match the Empire's military might while surpassing them in every other measure that mattered. The humans were no longer the primitive species that had once begged for mercy. They had become something far more dangerous. They had become equals, and they were smiling because they knew exactly what that meant for the future of the galaxy. The age of Zorathi dominance was about to end, not with violence and conquest, but with the simple realization that they were no longer the strongest force among the stars. The humans had made sure of that, and they had done it all while maintaining the one thing that made them truly formidable: their humanity.